Isaac somehow discovered at a young age that the wild bird is more swift and beautiful than the tame one. He was born on New Year's Eve in Oktibbeha County, Mississippi. He was all ready to be born in breech position. Like everything else in life, he was all set to jump in feet first. He was going to do it his own way, which usually meant an unconventional way, even if it was a bit more risky. But the doctors delivered him cesarean section instead. His grandmother Mace was there, and she said he came out with his eyes wide open and his legs kicking and his arms flying all around. He was excited to be born. He didn't even cry. If he knew how, he would have definitely laughed. The Perraults moved back to Tulsa about a year later. On his mother's side, Isaac was the first grandchild. His grandparents had been waiting a long time for him to come along. And they wanted to be with him as much as possible, and they remembered that he babbled a lot. And on one visit, they wanted to teach him some words. First, he learned his grandfather's name, Bobby. Is that right? And then he started calling his grandma Mace Bubba, a name which never wore off. Of course, on the Perrault side of the family, Isaac already had 9 other cousins older than him, 9 other grandkids competing for attention, but he had little trouble making himself known. He was funny from the start. In his baby book, there's a story about when he was 2 years old. He used to cry when his mother would wash his hair, and she asked him, "Why do you cry when I wash your hair?" And he didn't answer. And then she asked, "Is there anything that I could do to make washing your hair better?" And he looked at her in the eyes with great seriousness and said, "Candy." The name Isaac means to laugh. And Isaac certainly lived up to his name. Isaac was also an adventuresome and independent spirit. One time at age 3, he was in his stroller and he decided to drive himself. And he did, unfortunately, down a flight of stairs. And this part's not funny. He bit off his tongue completely. The strangest thing was that he had a lisp before he went into the surgery to get his tongue put back on, and afterward the lisp was gone. As an explorer, like many explorers, he usually learned his lessons the hard way. One time, at age 5, he killed his front tooth when he was trying to climb on a bar stool to get something, and it fell. Fortunately, it was a baby tooth. His friend Ben Murphy was like a brother to him growing up when he was young. And Ben remembers how they would always find something magical about whatever it was that they had found or whatever it was they were doing as kids. A simple canister became an undetonated bomb. Isaac had an endless imagination and a way of turning mundane things into something special. In elementary school, he found one of his mother's, Ben's sister, Amy, remembers how romantic Isaac was, even as a young boy. It was in elementary school when he found one of his mother's rings with a big turquoise stone in it on top of her jewelry box. And Amy will never forget the day when Isaac walked her around to a special place in the backyard, and he picked a honeysuckle and put it behind her ear, and gave her a kiss and asked her to marry him. By second grade, Isaac and his friend Michael O'Connell were already 2 peas in a pod. And Michael's mother remembers the These two 7-year-olds sitting in the back seat of her car having a deep theological discussion. Isaac started it by saying, "If God loved us so much to send his only son for our sins, why did he send us tornadoes?" And the discussion went on for a long time. Later in elementary religion class, these two were thorns in their teacher's side, as you can imagine. They would do things like take pens and write on themselves because they were being taught that the body was the temple of the Lord and it shouldn't be desecrated. Michael and Isaac were constantly questioning what they were being taught in their religion classes. And as I tried to say earlier, it wasn't that these boys weren't spiritually inclined. It was more about the teachings failing them than them failing the teachings. Isaac was a free spirit, and from a young age, his spirit would not be confined by anything that seemed too inauthentic, false, or simplistic. He was incredibly bright. The biggest problem was he knew it. At one point, as a boy, his parents actually took him to see a psychologist because they were worried that there might be something wrong with him. The psychologist had him tested, and she called them, and he said she had never had anyone score so high on an intelligence test in her life. Isaac never had to really study to get excellent grades. He had an almost photographic memory. His father, Jim, remembers watching Isaac memorize the entire periodic table of elements in 2 hours. After that, he could tell you the order of the entire table and all the names and code names of all the elements. In middle school at Marquette, Isaac played basketball. He participated in the academic bowl. He was on the robotics team, and he played a saxophone for a while in the band. He was always active and engaged and surrounded by friends. Boy Scouts, and particularly Troop 1, was a major part of Isaac's life growing up. He went on to become an Eagle Scout. His mother, Lisa, was his den mother in Cub Scouts, and then after 6th grade, his father, Jim, took over. And one of the highlights was that they went camping once a month together. Isaac went to the National Scout Jamboree twice. He went to Washington, D.C. and New York City with the Scouts. He went to worldwide scouting adventures, including he went to Sea Base. He's most famous, or infamous, for being one of the ringleaders of the Mighty Moose Patrol. I think there's some in the house this morning. It was a super tight-knit bunch of scouts who loved to cause trouble and who did the most outrageous and entertaining theatrical skits at campfires. Isaac was particularly funny and entertaining. And he was always trying to get things to explode. When he and the other boys heard that methane gas comes out of a latrine, they tried to set it on fire, the latrine on fire. The Mighty Moose Patrol, their favorite game was, hey, I wonder what this would do if it was burned. And they might have been able to build great campfires, but they wanted to have nothing to do with cooking. The dads cooked separately. That's how it's done. And these fathers of the boys would cook the most elaborate meals in hopes of inspiring them to someday learn to plan a menu and cook themselves. But the most of the boys ever planned, that they can remember, was to buy a box of frozen taquitos, which didn't work very well for them. But Isaac and his friends learned to call themselves, get this, they learned to call themselves taste testers, and they went around the camp to the different patrols taste testing everyone else's food. They would tell people that there was going to be an award at the end of the night.